welcome to another one of our discussions on the very popular internet series called The Chosen, which we've been commenting on. We actually did another podcast. Thank you, Nathaniel, for joining us. We wanted to get your take on episode 2 and 3 from season 2 of The Chosen. And firstly, I'd just like to ask you, in that episode, Jesus reaches out to the Samaritans and he has interaction with that Samaritan farmer. He actually sends John and James to plow the field of the Samaritan. Then his interaction with the Samaritans in the city, and the disciples, John and James' reaction when they were actually received a little bit of ridicule from the Samaritans on the road there, and Jesus' reaction is actually his first rebuke to his disciples. What was your take on that episode? What did you think about it?
Well, thanks for having me again. This is fun talking about The Chosen, and it's also kind of fun to be able to revisit and delve a little bit deeper into the message in general. So we were able to watch episode 2 the day that it was released, and of course we all enjoyed it. One thing that I do is I pause it for our younger kids and sometimes explain a little bit if they don't follow or catch exactly what's going on. And as it was true to form in season 1, they sure use their creative liberties to fill in a lot of the gaps and a lot of the spaces in between the lines of text of what happened. And it's fun to see where they take that. They used the parable of the Good Samaritan in this one, and they actually made one of the thieves in the parable that Jesus later tells the story of the Good Samaritan. One of the characters in the Good Samaritan is portrayed as a real person who was one of the thieves in that parable, and that was kind of interesting to see how they did that.
It also showed that in the robbery that apparently this Samaritan who owned that little farm was involved in had hurt his leg as a result of that robbery. And here Jesus is befriending them, not only befriending them, bringing food for a meal and having 2 of his disciples plow the field. Pretty interesting. Do you think it was too much of a stretch, or do you think it really got the message of what Jesus represented across in this storyline?
Right, good point, because Jesus really represented a departure of the Old Testament law, which it didn't necessarily preach an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, but it gave legal boundaries to repay somebody for evil that they might have done to you. I think through the court system, more than going and exacting the exact punishment yourself on somebody else. I think in the Old Testament, it was the law gave room to be able to get exactly back from someone who had harmed you or stolen from you that exact amount. That's where the eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth comes from, which we still use to this day a lot in our everyday language. But Jesus's message was a departure of that Mosaic law. And he went much further in saying that if someone steals your coat, let him have your cloak also. And if someone sues you at the law, go and give them exactly what they're asking for, and even give them more. So more than what they're asking for. So in this story of the Samaritan, Jesus goes way out of his way to have his disciples spend, I think it was their last money, at least in this episode. They didn't have a lot of money to spend, and
That's right. There was
used most of it.
Matthew was a little reluctant to give the money out. He said, if we eat like this every day, we're not going to make it to our destination. Interesting.
Right. So you kind of think that they're going to have a big feast of importance, but they end up taking all of that food that they bought to this Samaritan that lives way out on the outskirts of town and doesn't have money for anything. And they use that money for a meal with him. And then obviously, like you said, Jesus heals him from his hurt leg. So that was really, I think, a depiction of Jesus not only preaching this new state of mind, but living it, which is to forgive your enemies, to bless them that curse you, to pray for those that despitefully use you, and to go out of your way to do good for people that might not even be deserving of that goodness. Later on, I think Jesus is speaking to the Pharisees in Matthew 23, and he says, it's pretty easy to forgive men who are good to you.
You were talking about that verse in Matthew chapter 5. What does that verse say exactly?
Yes. In Matthew 5, Jesus says, let me look that up real quick. He says, for if you love them which love you, what reward have you? Do not even the publicans the same? So it's easy to love someone who loves you. It's easy to give praise to someone who gives you praise, but there's no reward in that. The reward is when you love someone that doesn't love you back. And I think that was the message that Jesus was trying to not only preach here, but to live. It's always much further reaching when we see the sample rather than just hearing the sermon. And Jesus was living his sermon. He was enacting what he was preaching. And I think that's the important part, the takeaway.
What did you think when you saw James and John, brothers, of course, plowing that field? Did you get it at first? Of course, as a viewer, I think we were all wondering, what in the world are they doing there? And you don't.
I had no idea. I had no idea what that was all about until they tied it in at the end. Yeah. They were helping one of these, that Samaritan man who was injured and had a hard time keeping his fields, to do the work for him and to kind of get a kickstart to getting his life back together again. And, whether or not that happened, I think is besides the point, but really helping somebody like that who was on the outskirts of town and having a hard time just getting by, they were helping him to kind of get a kickstart or a head start to getting back to getting his life in order. And, just imagine someone like that who not only had been healed of a wound, given a little bit of financial incentive to get his fields back in order, but then being forgiven of something that he probably thought was murder, because this Samaritan thought that maybe he had killed the person that they had robbed in that story. And Jesus told him, no, you didn't kill him. He survived that and he's fine. And taking that weight off of his shoulders allowed him to be able to go forward and get on with his life and probably influence a lot of people himself going forward and being able to forgive others in the same way that he had been forgiven.
I think this is the episode 2 also, which starts very interestingly enough in the fact that John is actually sitting down with the mother of Jesus, Mother Mary, as we'll call her, and beginning to write his account of his times with Jesus and trying to figure out how to start it in the beginning. And of course, at the end of this episode, Jesus invites John into that sanctuary where the word is being stored to help him pick out what he's going to read at the synagogue. How did you think, was that realistic, the way John at the end of that episode starts writing? In the beginning was the word? Quite amazing depiction of how they chose to portray it like that.
For me, it was very tasteful. And this is one of those subjects that there are going to be a lot of different opinions about that, because I understand that analytically, for those who want to kind of make sense of everything in how the Bible was written, and was it really inspired by God, or was it just a bunch of men that in their own way or in their own time wrote these words down? St. Augustine in the 14th or 15th century said, seek not to understand that thou mayest believe, but believe that thou mayest understand. And he was one who probably devoted many, many years of his life trying to write things down and make sense of things. And Solomon, somewhere in the book of Solomon, said, all is vanity, saith the preacher. At the end of studying and examining everything, really there's a beauty in the simplicity of being able to accept things and receive things as if they were intended for you. And for me, it's never really been such an issue of debate, wondering if the Bible was written by Jesus's disciples sitting on the side, writing it all down on a tablet at the moment that it happened, or whether those stories were written maybe 30 or 40 or 50 years later. I think the important thing to remember here for those who fall, on either side of this discussion, is that those Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, were all written by firsthand witnesses and people that had actually seen it. And even if it was recounted or retold later on when they were older, like you said in the beginning of that episode, John is an older man and Mother Mary is older also, but in their minds, those memories were still fresh enough to remember the details. And just like every one of us who have lived for a little while, the important things in our lives are still pretty fresh in our memories, even if they happen.
For people who were alive when John Kennedy was killed, for example, anybody that remembered that moment will remember where they were and remember the details. It was such a historic event. Same 9/11 or any other big catastrophe or traumatic event that happened. Most people will remember the details of those types of things. One interesting point also, which maybe a lot of people didn't understand, was how come the Samaritans were angry at the Jews, and then here the priest of the synagogue, or the temple there in where they were in Samaria, was inviting Jesus to come. It seems like they were Jews, and what a lot of people don't realize is that Samaritans did have Jewish blood in them, and they still were reading the Torah, or the first 5 books of the Bible. I don't think they had the other scriptures, and that's why there was a relationship there. When the Jews, I believe, were taken out to captivity, the Samaritans were actually left behind, and they got to stay behind and sort of separated from the Jewish nation. So when the Jews came back that's a whole kind of interesting thing that they brought out there, which most people maybe don't know the historical background of how that fits together.
And it's interesting you mentioned that, because I'm one of those people that I'm not very intelligent. I don't have a high enough IQ to read something and remember it. When I read a manual, I have to read it 3 or 4 times to be able to really get it. And even though I probably had known about the Samaritans long ago, I couldn't quite remember the connection there. Like, why were the Samaritans the outcasts that didn't get along with the Jews? So what did I do? I went to Wikipedia and I read up on it after this episode of The Chosen. And you're right, they were Jews, but they were outcasts. And there was some kind of a different clan of Samaritans that considered themselves to be Jews, but weren't really accepted. Anyone who wants to look into that a little bit more can, yes, and read the history there. I think at the end of the day, they all came from the same tribe, though. They were all
they were all Jews. They came from the only 2 tribes of Israel after the Babylonian captivity that were still intact was the tribe of Judah and the tribe of Benjamin. And Jesus, of course, being the Lion of Judah, came from the tribe of Judah. So it was important to fulfill Bible prophecy that the Jews would know which tribe the Messiah came from, the tribe of Judah. Today, they're all mixed up, so you can't really say which tribe you came from. But anyway, if we could just move on to episode 3.
Before we move on from that, can I just say one little thing about this subject? Because one of the reasons for me, it's not all that even interesting to get so deep into the lineage of this and who came from what tribe and were the Samaritans Jews or not, is because before we move on from this subject, what was Jesus's message to the woman at the well who was a Samaritan? I think for me, the big takeaway of him even going there and meeting her was that he told her that the day is coming and now is when they that worship me will worship me in spirit and in truth. They won't need to go to Jerusalem, and they won't need to go to the synagogue, and they won't even need to go to church. And the reason for me that that's so special is because for everyone who was outside of that circle of the chosen people, which were the Jews up until that point, how were they supposed to be able to get in if they wanted to, if they weren't born into that? And Jesus was basically telling her and the world at that time that starting now, the people who want to have a relationship with God are going to need to have one in spirit. And it's not going to be about physically going to a church or a synagogue or a mosque. It's not going to be about physically doing something. It's going to be about having a spiritual relationship. And the reason that that is so important in my mind is because every one of us has a different version. When we close our eyes and when we think about God, we might all have a different version of what we understand to be God or what we feel to be God. And the reason I like that so much is because you can't put your finger on it for anyone to say this is how it is for everybody. Because in the spirit world, when we close our eyes, even to this day, I have a hard time describing in words what the spirit world is. And if Jesus is telling us they that worship me must worship me in spirit, and if I can't even say, well, what is the spirit? That just shows how vast that option for everybody who's ever lived from that point on who want to have a relationship with God. It's like this whole new universe just opened up. And anyone who wants to worship God in spirit can now do that. You don't have to go to a certain place, and you don't have to be of a certain religion even, because religion is a man-made thing. And faith in God is something that you can't explain or put your finger on. You can't take it away from someone once they have it. It's something within our hearts and our minds. And I think that that for me is the biggest takeaway of Jesus going to Samaria there, was that it's no longer about being a chosen person, a person who was born into this chosen people of God, kind of a circle, but it's really about a spiritual relationship, which is now going to take place in every person's heart between them and God. And that's beautiful for me. And I hope that a lot of people that still don't know where they fall as far as what their belief system is, that they can give God a chance by opening their hearts and closing their eyes and asking him to show them whether he's real or not, and whether there is a way that they can have a relationship with him. And I think that all you have to do is give God one chance, and that's all he needs. If God is big enough to create the universe, then he's not bound by a book. He's not bound by a building. He's not bound by someone's interpretation of what he is. There's no limit to what God can do for those who are willing to open their hearts and give him a chance.
This is really the first time in this episode also in his relationship with his disciples that he really became stern. We've seen him dance at the wedding. We've seen him sit down and have a good time at meal time with his disciples. We've seen him joke even. He was serious when he was healing, and when he's reaching out, he was pretty gentle with the children in that episode we saw back in season number 1. But this time when John and James were ready to fight the Samaritans for whatever, those were apples or tomatoes they were throwing at them, and he had to put his arms out and said, stop, we're not going to react like this. And he actually, it was the first time we saw Jesus rebuke his disciples and put them, scold them for having that attitude. I thought that was pretty interesting to see him put his foot down to them for their reaction.
Absolutely. He's their big brother. He's their shepherd, and at the end of the day, he's the one who calls the shots. And I thought it was pretty funny. He says, "Thunder, you want me to bring down thunder and destroy them?" And once they snapped out of it, they realized how extreme that was. It's we're humans, and I think humans have a tendency to just react in a very human way. And sometimes we have to really fight against our own human nature when our human nature wants to hurt someone who hurts us, take away something from someone who has taken away something from us. And that's just part of the struggle of being human, is to do what Jesus was telling those 2 disciples to do, to just let it pass, take a breath. Or like Taylor Swift says in that song, shake it off.
Yes. Well, we'd like to give a little shout out right now to Dallas Jenkins, and thanking him for giving us the surprise on that evening. And that was episode number 3, which was truly a surprise. We actually watched episode 2 in our theater here. So we had a big screen, and we had it projected up there. So it was really fun to see it like a movie on a movie screen. Quite an experience for all of us. And then to see him go right into episode 3 was quite a treat. As we started episode 3, we saw that one shot. The people in the room, I said, do you see what's going on here? This is like a one-take shot. They didn't know what I was talking about. And then to hear Dallas talk about that continuous 15-minute shot, which as he pointed out in his little discussion after the episode, you very rarely see that. So it was quite a cinematic accomplishment, I think, to have pulled that one shot off with no cuts. Basically, that in that episode 3, we saw that pretty much interaction while Jesus was off healing the people, and we didn't really see him till the very end, how exhausted he was. We saw the disciples talk about their relationship and how they got pulled into being a disciple, a follower of Jesus there, and then the bickering that they got into, the rebuke from Simon to Matthew and all that. What was your takeaway from that episode and from the interaction that you saw with the disciples there?
I really enjoyed that episode. I noticed within 60 seconds that the camera wasn't cutting away. That's one of the things that catches my eye right away. And while it's certainly not on the level of movies like 1917, where the whole movie is done in an amazing way, The Chosen did pretty good because they had to rehearse that 14 or 15-minute segment. You know that they rehearsed that many times. And whether or not they got it all perfect with, the lighting was a little bit dark in some areas as the sun was going down. Here's what that scene did for me. It kind of helped freeze time a little bit. And what it did is it helped me realize that those stories that we read about in the Gospels, you can read the book of Matthew, the book of Mark, Luke, and John in maybe a couple of hours. From beginning to end, but every day that those stories were taking place were 24-hour days. And if you took a little slice of time out of one of those days, you kind of get what this episode gave you, which was a 36-minute slice out of a single day. And it kind of helped stop time for me and realize that, yes, there were a lot of things that must have happened in each of those days that they can't account for, because you can't account for 24 hours every day. And I liked how it did for me. It did that. It made me realize that there was probably a lot of arguing, maybe even some board games where the disciples are playing some kind of a game. I liked that because that might have been me, and I hadn't even thought about that. Like, would Jesus even let them do their own thing while he was busy? Obviously he trusted them to do a lot. He handpicked those people to spread the word. The part where Simon kind of gets on Matthew's case and they're still fighting and they can't quite be friends yet. I don't know if that's how it was or not. I have to go back to Jesus of Nazareth on that one, because the way Franco Zeffirelli showed the scene of Simon Peter kind of being intermediated by Jesus with Matthew, the tax collector. Simon Peter didn't want to go into Matthew's house in Jesus of Nazareth, and they're having this big fancy party. And Jesus tells the story of the prodigal son, and he uses the prodigal son to bring Simon and Matthew together. And at the end of that little 5-minute exchange in the movie Jesus of Nazareth, they're hugging each other and they're crying in each other's arms. And then from that point on, I think they had the victory. They had the victory of their relationship issues at that point. And I don't think that they would have kept revisiting it personally, but who knows? It's very possible that things came up again and again and again until they eventually got the victory over it and were able to move on. The culmination of that episode, though, where Jesus kind of comes in and he's got blood all over him because some of the people that he healed were probably injured or maybe they were bloody. And Mother Mary made a comment earlier that once Jesus became a teenager, he didn't really need her anymore. that he could take care of himself, and she felt like he didn't need her anymore. But then at the very end, he's so exhausted he can't even take his clothes off, and then Mother Mary runs and helps him and takes his clothes off and washes him up. And that was really touching for me, because he needed her right then. And it was a beautiful way to bring it all together.
I think one of the beautiful sides of this series, of course, and you got to really hand it to the guys that wrote the script, that they're really bringing the human side of Jesus out, not only the supernatural side, but the human side, and that Jesus actually felt all of the same things that we feel as humans, to know what it was like to be human before he gave his life for everybody. Yeah, well, thank you for the insight on all of that. And we certainly look forward to episode 4, which we won't be able to watch on YouTube, as mentioned, as announced, that you have to have the app, and then I guess you're going to have to cast it on your device at home. And we continue to pray for the editors now, and as the script continues to develop for future seasons, we certainly are. It's certainly become an exciting little element in our lives, I think.
Very nice. Yes, absolutely.
Well, thanks, Nathaniel, for being here with us. We appreciate you joining us and your insight on all of this, and we look forward to talking to you again down the line here.
Absolutely. Thanks again for having me.
God bless you. And thank you all for watching us. We hope you enjoyed this little episode, and that perhaps there's some takeaways for you. And if you haven't seen The Chosen, you need to really get the app and connect in, because it's really an amazing experience.